Welcome to Digital Momentum. My name is Maria Holzinger and I'm happy to be the host of today's episode. My guests, smec's very own Ralph Mayr and Michael Weichselbaumer, had the opportunity to go to New York City and visit the National Retail Federation's annual gathering, modestly titled The Big Show. I'm curious to find out what their biggest learnings are. So hi, Ralph. Hi, Michael. Welcome to our podcast. Happy to have you here.
Hey, yeah, thanks for having us.
So I just want to jump in because I'm so curious to know everything and just to learn what you learned basically in the Big Apple. So NRF is a very big event in the US, I'd say. But what are your biggest takeaways for actually the European retailers? Ralph, maybe you want to start.
Yeah, definitely. So that's an interesting question because in general, retail is not that different across the world, right? But one thing that makes the US very specific and very peculiar is just the scale at which some of those retailers are operating. And one interesting takeaway here from the NRF conference was how retailers like Walmart or Best Buy or Target, how they coped with the disruptions caused by the pandemic and how challenging, but also how interesting it was for them to roll out new models such as click and collect across a really large scale of physical locations.
Michael, what are your learnings?
On the first hand, I can only agree to what Ralph has said, as well as being surprised to a certain extent of how much diversity and inclusion, all those topics are really discussed on a broad scale and are a very important topic for the general public in the US. And what also was quite surprising to me, the fact that expected inflation was a very hot topic among retailers. They were really expecting that the foreseeable inflation from their point of view is going to have an effect on their business models. They were, for certain verticals, for example, embracing the creation of private labels and thinking that private labels in general are becoming more important for them. What also was a kind of interesting takeaway is that finally, I'd say AI and data science have fully arrived in the mind of every retailer. So it's on every retailer's, basically on every CEO's plate that this is something they need to think about and basically try to incorporate into their company or organization.
Mm-hmm. So, but then what are the biggest differences you would say between the US retailers and the European retailers? Are they further ahead? What are their challenges? And how can European retailers maybe already prepare for those challenges that sooner or later will be arriving at our markets?
I can only tie into what Michael just said on the AI and data science topic. To give you a practical example, one of the big issues that was discussed a lot at the conference was how retailers can cope with this ongoing uncertainty when it comes to supply. And an interesting idea that some of them had was just leveraging their existing data-driven capabilities and applying them to predict other things rather than just demand, for example, but also supply. So to basically take those data capabilities that they have and those machine learning models and those data science capacities and apply them to predict what would happen if supply levels changed or supply times just were a lot longer or so. And of course, that's a big connection back to the AI and data science topic. And that, of course, is the same in the US as in Europe. But as Michael said, we really learned that for US retailers, AI and data science definitely is on top of everybody's minds. And I'm not so sure if that's the case with every retailer in Europe to be true.
Michael, did you also gather some big differences here?
Well, what I think is really an opportunity for European retailers, especially, is being aware of the experience you provide as a retailer and being ready to invest in the experience. After having listened to many thought leaders in the retail industry in the US, basically my main conclusion is that if you're into retail, in order to stay ahead of the competition, you only have a certain set of levers that you can pull, and experience is definitely one of them. And one of the big learnings is that people are moving away from this thought of this is my digital channel, this is my physical channel. This has been a topic that has been going on for several years, but it's really about how can the experience in the digital channels be improved, how can the experience in the physical channels be improved, and even more important, how can existing barriers between those channels be eroded. So it's really an opportunity to focus on erasing the barriers between physical and digital channels, and provide a seamless experience to consumers. I think this is something that has taken US retailers a certain time to learn, and in order to taken time to learn to understand which parts of the physical experience need to become, from a certain point of view, more transactional, which parts of the digital experience need to become a bit more exciting and personalized. And if you get that mix right, you are in the position to get ahead of the competition.
Mm-hmm. This also goes into play with that retail has faced huge disruption because of the pandemic, because of other factors, because of the changing markets. Can we already draw some conclusions about the lessons that the US already learned? I think you've mentioned some of those learnings already, Michael, but are there some conclusions for European markets there and for the lessons learned for the US markets?
To me, it's like basically pandemic, great resignation, which means in the US a lot of people are actually quitting their job. There's a shortage in available workforce, the rise of inflation, all those things have been thrown at the retail industry, and the retail industry has responded with great agility and has overcome those challenges to a certain amount. Sometimes quicker, sometimes not so quick, but in the end it still remained true to its original mission, which is always to serve its consumers. I think what we definitely can say has been learned by the retail industry in general is that the role of physical stores is changing. So a few years ago, there was this assumption that, well, everything is going to be digital, physical is going to be dead sooner or later. That perception has clearly changed. The role of physical is evolving into an idea of basically what is called a hub and spoke model, meaning that your physical locations also part of your logistics and distribution centers and can be utilized for that purpose. And that's I think one of the main conclusions that I would draw.
Mm-hmm. And Ralph, a question to you here. The traditional brick and mortar retail has often been proclaimed dead. I think there was a very interesting debate going on, as you told me here, Ralph, that Brian Cornell, the CEO of Target, actually said brick and mortar is dead. The brick and mortar retail is dead. Do you want to maybe elaborate on that?
Yeah, that was an interesting story, actually. And in his keynote, he mentioned that actually a couple of years ago, so before the start of the pandemic, he faced a huge pressure from his board of directors to essentially cut down on brick and mortar retail because of what Michael just mentioned, namely that people thought the future would be purely digital and purely e-commerce based. But then, especially throughout the pandemic, they learned that those physical locations in so many places, as Target has them, can be leveraged as huge assets. Also, for example, as fulfillment centers for e-commerce. So this combination and this blending of leveraging assets that you already have in the sense of physical locations and leveraging them for new models that are partly digital and partly physical, that was definitely a big learning for them, for Target. And I think also something the European retailers can relate to. So I'm thinking about a couple of clients that I'm working with who mentioned the exact same thing, namely that this overlap between being able to also shift workforce quickly. So having somebody working in a physical store serving customers, but in sort of the low tide times in the store, preparing packages to be sent out for e-commerce fulfillment. That was a big asset for some of them who have access to both physical and the digital experience. So definitely a good learning and something that can be replicated in Europe as well, I think.
Very interesting. Very interesting. So, Michael, one question for you as our expert here. Data and analytics is getting more and more important in general, but in general, I'd say in retail optimization. So, what novel ideas did you hear about that in the conference?
Well, there have been a lot of ideas. What was really a novelty to me was that even big US retailers become more and more aware of regulations like the GDPR in Europe, and think that they consider them as external factors that make it essential for them to get their privacy and ethics when it comes to data acquisition right now. And what was really interesting is this broad consensus among retailers that now is the time to really first of all do that, and then really get started with acquiring and leveraging consumer data, and that this acquiring and leveraging consumer data is the next key differentiator for them. Yeah, what was also really interesting, the experience that was shared by the CEO of Best Buy, Corey Berry, when she said that they have learned that when their customers, once they experience and once they learn that they as Best Buy know what is important to them right now in a certain situation, when they, for example, approach after sales services, that customers actually appreciate this kind of experience that includes, okay, my retailer knows a lot of stuff about me and knows that I'm approaching him because of a certain problem that I have, or because I'm interested in a certain topic, and that this experience really reflects into increased customer or consumer loyalty from the retailer's perspective. So those retailers have basically learned that investing in data and analytics really helps to improve bottom line numbers. And that was really one big change in momentum from my point of view. And what I also think is that these huge organizations, because of the challenges they have been facing during the pandemic, really have become more fond of the idea of moving fast and exploring and learning. And as the president of the NRF stated, Matthew Shea, he really did a quote that I would like to repeat. He said, "If you don't like change and flexibility, you will like irrelevance even less."
Very true. So that's one thing we can prepare for, to not be irrelevant in the future, definitely. So one thing that leads me already to the next topic, I'd say, is then trends. Beyond what's relevant today, obviously there are those big future trends, or as others might call them, mega trends. What kind of trends were really hyped at the NRF? Ralph, maybe you want to start here.
Sure, yeah, that was also one of the key things why I was so interested in the conference in the first place, because we wanted to learn what the big trends and the big sort of future consumer behaviors are that the people are expecting and that retailers should prepare for right now. But first of all, I want to underscore again what Michael just said on the innovation piece, because that's so valuable. Retailers in the past were not perceived as the most innovative industry, I would say, especially those industry giants, like, as we said, a Walmart or a Best Buy, who were considered rather behemoths in their corporate behavior. But the fact that they were forced to innovate so quickly throughout the pandemic, offering new models, new fulfillment models, new distribution models, that really taught them how to innovate on a weekly or even daily cycle and try out new things in the market really, really fast. And that's definitely here to stay. That's not going to go away. And that is a capability that they can then leverage also to address all of the other trends that might be coming up. Some of those trends that were discussed there at the NRF conference were, for us Europeans, a little bit more on the futuristic side, I would say. So there were surprisingly many talks about the metaverse and what retailers can expect from everybody living in the metaverse 2 years from now. And there was a quite wide variety of takes on that, which I found really interesting. So you've got people there who are saying, well, the metaverse is already here. Big brands like Adidas, like Nike, like Gucci, they already have virtual storefronts in one or the other version or implementation of the metaverse. For others, it's really a totally futuristic topic, and they connect it with things like NFT commerce, direct to avatar commerce, and all those more slightly less tangible areas of business. But there is a definitely good connection there and a path there for every retailer to leverage these types of things. So one thing that came up repeatedly was, well, if you're a traditional retailer, you're selling physical goods, you want to build up your brand reputation, now is definitely the time to start up at least a small test balloon of advertising in one or the other metaverse implementation, because that is a channel to reach a very different audience than you would on your traditional advertising channels. I really love the statement by one of the market researchers there who talked about the metaverse, who said that in a couple of years from now, I think in 2030 already, the combined spending power of millennials and Generation Zs, so people roughly born after 1995, is expected already to exceed the spending power of baby boomers and millennials combined. Sorry. So the point there is that really there's a lot of potential there in this very young generation of consumers. And as a retailer, you should trying to meet those that new generation of consumers where they are and where they want to be met. And that's essentially on their phones, in the social apps that they're using, and why not also in the metaverse?
Yeah. So should then what is the conclusion there for the European retailers? Should we already get our storefront basically in the metaverse, or how should we kind of prepare for all those mega trends? What would be your drawbacks here, or your conclusions?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, of course, and a question that I think is on top of everybody's minds now in the retail industry, right? I think there's two answers to that. So on the more strategic level, having the capability to innovate fast and to try out those new things fast is hugely important, and is getting even more important because you don't know which of the different metaverse implementations will stick, for example. So you just have to place bets on some of them and see which actually takes off, if the whole thing actually takes off for you. But on the other side, I think it's also interesting to take a look not so much at the US retailers, but to take a look also at Asian retailers, for example, and to see what people in Japan and South Korea are up to. One thing that I haven't known before the conference was that Seoul is going to be the first city moving to the metaverse, and it's going to be a virtual replication of Seoul in the metaverse, including a lot of stores, obviously, and this is something that we have not seen in the US, and we have also not seen in Europe happening so far. So yeah, looking at US retailers when it comes to innovation, definitely helpful. But if you want to really be at the bleeding edge of innovation, why not also take a closer look at what the guys in Europe, in Asia are up to? Sorry.
Michael, what's your take on that?
Well, when we're talking about trends, I would like to add on what Ralph said regarding metaverse and NFTs. One perspective that I really liked was the idea of think of the metaverse as an additional engagement channel, especially for the generation of consumers that is about to, basically move into a commercially relevant existence. Let's try to put it this way. So a possibility of getting a first hands-on experience with brands that have a certain price point. I think one of the examples that somebody mentioned was that what used to be the expensive fashion brand's lipstick somebody would get as a first item of that brand now could be this branded item in the metaverse, was this branded digital item. Also the fact that, for example, over 60% of the under 14-year-olds in the US had some kind of in-game metaverse currency on their wish list was really something that shows the upcoming commercial relevance of those channels. And what is I think a little bit more immediate when we think about it from a time perspective is really this idea of, besides getting your experience right, is moving towards personalization of individual consumer experience. And clear idea, or the clear concept that basically retailers had, and which, by the way, we also have, is that in order to be able to provide a personalized experience, you need a centralized data platform in order to get a consolidated view on clients and what they expect. This is also the direction that we are moving into, helping retailers make this kind of personalization become a reality.
Thank you so much, guys, for summarizing your experience there. And one way of summarizing that I want to conclude then this episode of the podcast with is obviously, because we want to stay current here, what would your hashtag be for your experience? We've learned this. The hashtag for your overall experience, Ralph, for the NRF experience for you.
I'm going to stay rather conservative and pick the conference motto as a hashtag, which was #accelerate.
Wonderful. Michael, what about you? What's your hashtag?
I guess my hashtag is either going to be big show, because it was a big show, or it's going to be data-driven.
Thank you, everybody, for listening. And if you enjoyed this podcast, feel free to share, like, and subscribe. This podcast is produced by Smarter Ecommerce. And to learn more on topics like these and more, visit our website, smarter-ecommerce.com. Thank you, guys.